I dropped out of school and I was hanging around over there in North Nashville. My daddy was living in Columbia. And he came up and caught me one night and he told me, he said, well, I'm not going to have no child of mine running around out here unsupervised and stuff and looking like a damn tramp and acting like a thug. So you got 2 weeks to bring your butt back home to Columbia or join the army. So I joined the army.
Oh.
wish I hadn't have done that, but
Yeah.
see, my daddy was an accountant. He had an accounting firm, but he also worked for General Service Administration. So he was the General Service Administration Government Buildings Manager. So his first job assignment under that organization was the post office building in Columbia, Tennessee. So he uprooted the whole family and moved us to Columbia. Well, I didn't like Columbia. It was country. Chris Nashville was country then too, but it was country, and it was too slow for me. So I didn't like it. So I ran away from home. My grandmother lived here in Nashville. I hitchhiked back to Nashville and got to hanging out my old haunts with all my old school buddies and living with one of my school buddies, which he and I joined the army together. And I found out, I had a little job working at a restaurant in the evening. I was going to school. I was still going to school. I'd go to school in the daytime and go work my job in the evening. And I had this little room. And I come home from work one night about 11 o'clock and climbed the steps and went in there and turned on the light, and my dad was sitting in the middle of my bed in the dark. That's when he gave me the little speech about coming back home or whatever, And I was determined that I was going to go back to Columbia, live down there. And of course, my daddy was the dumbest son I ever knew. But by the time I finished basic training, I was surprised at how much he learned in that short amount of time, Because I ran away and joined the army, and how to do basic training, boy, they give you the devil. And man, by the time I got back home, but I didn't realize that was just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So I went from there, I went to engineer ordnance school at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, after I finished basic training. And there they taught us about ordnance and explosives and stuff like that. So then I went to, my first permanent duty station was as a company armorer at a training company in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And as luck would have it, within the first year, I come up on the turn to go to Vietnam. That was Vietnam was kind of like a saving grace, and it was kind of like an eye-opener because Vietnam was not so spit and polished, not so stickler for the rules and stuff. Everything was lax over there because it was a life and death situation, and anybody could get killed over there, anybody from a cook to a supply sergeant to anybody, because it was the war zone. And so they wasn't so strict on spit and polish and uniforms worn right and all that kind of stuff. What they were sticklers about was routine, doing your assigned routine whenever an alert come up or whenever you come under attack, everybody knowing what to do automatically without, fumbling. Well, I was originally assigned to an engineer supply company. We were supposed to furnish parts for engineering equipment and ordnance and stuff like that, building bomb sites and building artillery placements and stuff like that. But what happened was two things. First of all, my training in the ordnance school in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, taught me a little more about explosives than arms. I knew more about explosives and emergency ordnance disposal and stuff than I did arms. And the second thing was that I became fascinated with the Vietnamese language, and I started learning how to speak Vietnamese. Well, I started teaching myself. I would deal with the kids around the orphanages and the school teachers. A lot of the school teachers had studied in France and stuff, and a lot of them spoke English pretty well. But I just became fascinated with the language, and I found out that it was just coming to me like that. So I got to where I was pretty proficient with the language. So with my knowledge of bombs, a knowledge of explosives, I'll say, and my knowledge of the language, they found other uses for it. They formed a detachment, and they made me a member of that detachment. And the detachment was working with reconnaissance crews. But it was all kind. It was infantry units. It was just any kind of unit, worked at air bases and places like that. And we would go out and scout spots to build gun placements and to build artillery bases and stuff like that, or air bases. And of course, explosives was a part of it, because a lot of times those areas, some of them were manned, so they needed people that know how to defuse mines and stuff like that. Well, as time went on, I became pretty good at what I was doing. So, but the other part of it was that I was also a screw up. So they called themselves putting me on punishment details by making me take these assignments, right? Mm-hmm. But I became pretty good at it, so that became my MOS. That became my primary job, right, was to work with these observation teams, and I got pretty serious about it. So I'd say within 5 or 6 months, I was working full time with reconnaissance teams. Because of my knowledge of the language, sometimes they would be so close that they could hear people talking, or they could intercept radio transmissions, and they didn't know what was being said. And Army trained interpreters were usually either Vietnamese themselves, who were Army in the South Vietnamese regular Army, or they were school taught, who, the Army had to put a lot of time and money into training people to speak different languages and to be interpreters, and the interpreters didn't really want to go into forward areas. They didn't want to be that far. They would rather deal with prisoners, if you caught prisoners, or brought them back with those kind of interrogations. So with the little knowledge that I had of the language, I could just about follow a conversation, and I could tell them what was being said. So that kind of put me on a high priority as far as being selected to go with teams. I started off in a place called Cameron Bay, which was kind of like a in-country entrance spot where a lot of the new troops would come. It had a big large bay where ships could come in and deliver supplies and places like that. Then we moved up the hill to a place called Nha Trang, which Nha Trang was an in-country R&R center. It was like a resort area. But they had a lot of combat units operating out of Nha Trang. So from Nha Trang, I moved a little further north to a place called Tui Wa, which was kind of a remote area, but it had a pretty big airport there. So the air base was, they also had Army helicopters and stuff stationed at the air base. So from there, I just kind of moved around. I went to An Khê. I went to Bien Hoa down south. Bien Hoa was the home of the 173rd Airborne, 145th Aviation Unit called Cowboys, who were mostly the airborne transportation in the battle. Actually, I belonged to a detachment which consisted of 24 men. Out of those 24 men, as they got missions, or as they required people to go on missions, they would pull from that 24-man team. And so I was kind of like a member of that 24-man team. But the difference being is that I went on just about every mission that 24-man team pulled because of my knowledge of the language. We operated mostly in the Central Highland, and there wasn't that many rivers that ran extensively into the mountain areas. Mm-hmm. And then if you did go in by boat, you'd probably have too long of a distance to travel before you could get to where there was some activity. Well, helicopters were they were always they was always available to us, because the aviation companies, this is primarily what they did, was transported people into and out of endangered areas. even when they had a major insertion like they go carry a whole battalion or a whole brigade of people, they would always already have those logistics mapped out. But as far as us, what we did was like if they, the intelligence people and all them, they mapped out a particular area. They say, for instance, we're sitting here, we want to know what's going on downtown Franklin. Well, they would call our companies or call the companies that we worked for and say, you know, we need to get some eyes on downtown Franklin. And then they would okay a mission, get it approved. And a lot of times, like within our detachment receiving the mission, we would be out in less than an hour, I'd say. Mm. So we stayed in a state of readiness. I mean, we were always prepared, had our rucksacks and everything already packed, and just about anything you would need. That preparation started when you returned from a mission and decompressed. Then you started preparing for the next one, you know. So if you depleted anything, if you had run out of water or run out of this or run out of that, if you was a medic, if you run out of medical supplies, whatever, you replenished all that as soon as you got back, you know. The people who operated these alert teams, they had people that specialized in different things. Like you had an armorer, a guy who knew how to break down and repair weapons quick. You had maybe an explosive guy, a guy who knew how to set claymores or defuse tripwires or stuff like that. You had maybe a sniper. Like most teams usually had a sniper, you know. And the sniper's job, basically, snipers very seldom went with the team. If you got inserted by a helicopter where you prepared in or was set off in a place and walked into an observation place, the sniper would get off the chopper and usually go in the opposite direction. He would look for a high spot where he could observe us, so he basically had our back, but he could get back to an extraction point or whatever. So snipers usually travel alone. They were usually alone. My primary job was to listen. Yeah. It was to listen. You know, if they had a mission that they were planning on getting close enough to hear what was going on or whether they were going to intercept some radio transmissions or something, then that was my primary job. But due to my education with explosives and stuff, if they ran across booby traps or if they wanted to set it like maybe to avoid being trapped into an ambush or something, they wanted to set up claymores or something like that, then that would be what my job was. Awesome. We could be out as short as 24 hours and as long as maybe a week, depending on the difficulty to getting to the objective, and like radio contact was at a minimum. See, once we set up or inserted ourselves, we would probably set up a specific time to transmit, and the rest of the time was radio silence. And so what happened was on this last particular extraction, it was damn near dusk off, and we had been compromised. They knew that we were there. They were looking for us, and so we needed to be extracted as soon as possible. And we made contact, and we were like, I'd say maybe as close as from here to Murfreesboro Road to being picked up to our rendezvous spot. And just about time we said we crossed the street here, they had a guy flying around, Colonel, full-bird Colonel. He's flying around, and when you see these little helicopters look like a bumblebee, sometimes they'd be in a Piper Cub, so they would be up. Helicopters usually flew close to the ground because you could hear them, but you couldn't see them until they got right up on you. And they usually flew down close to treetop level. And the spotters would usually be higher, and they could see the whole field of action. And so it was getting close to dark, and this colonel called all birds down. That means anything in the air return to base. And we were like, if we got to stay on the ground overnight and dodge these people, we might not make it. And so I'd say 5 seconds after the all birds down call was made, That's the end of transmission for the night. Ain't nobody supposed to contact us. We ain't supposed to contact nobody after this last transmission. All of a sudden the radio said, "Hey bro, where you at?" And I was like, "All birds down, dog." He said, "Pop and smoke, I got your back." I said, "Color." He said, "Red." You see red for 10 miles. It's damn near dust dark, so we pop green. He said, "Turn left 2 degrees on you in 5." He talking about 5 minutes. I'm going to be right there, 5 minutes, turn left 2 degrees. So if you go on here and you turn maybe 2 degrees, turn about that, he can see us. He see where the smoke is. And he can see an area that we can be picked up at, not that far from us. And like when we got to the bush, when we got to the clearing, procedure for approaching a clearing. First man out, go maybe far from here to that wall, stop, turn back and point his gun back at you. Second man go that much further past him until everybody's out, and then you go to your objective. So when we get there to the clearing, like this chopper sitting, I said maybe as far as from here to the park over there, he's just sitting there, dead still. Can't even hear his rotors running. And he's probably about 4 feet off the ground. And when the first man go out, he holler, "Come, babe." Oh, y'all come. We bum rushed the chopper. When the last man's foot hit the rudder, this boy took that chopper. He don't do this. He turned that thing sideways and went like that for at least a quarter of a mile before he straightened it up. Now he can't carry us back to base because they've been ordered everybody to go back to base and nobody pick us up. So he got to let us out. We got to walk in the base at dark. So it's dust dark when he picked us up. You know, I'd say 10 more minutes, you wouldn't even been able to navigate on foot on the ground, you know.
Right.
So he led us out about a quarter mile from the base, and we had to walk in, had to get through the wire, had to, you know, we had to negotiate security on the base because, you know, they could very well think that we was some alien team coming in and trying to do away with us. So that was the most vivid one that I remember, because had they not picked us up that night, I don't know if we would have survived on the ground all night, because we wasn't that good at escaping evasion, you know. My time in country was getting short, and usually as a rule, what they call short timers, they didn't subject them to the danger of maybe getting killed within the last week or two in country, you know. I was in Vietnam almost, I was there from from June of 66 to June of 68, so almost 2 years. Well, what it was, I just never did come back. I didn't want to come back to the United States and go back to garrison where it's spitting polish and inspections and all that nonsense after having been under the free reign of being in a war zone, you know. And like it did happen before I got this job, because like I left Vietnam in June of 68. I was discharged from Fort Bragg in November of 68. So one of the things that was going on was that they were rioting in cities all over the United States, and they were going to units that had veterans, especially Vietnam veterans, to go into these cities as peacekeeping forces to put down the rioting. Like they got the National Guard, like calling the National Guard out, but at the time, National Guard, they had so many riots going so many places, National Guard was strict. So they were going to army bases and actually sending, especially combat troops, to put down the riot. So I told them over at Fort Bragg they were going to send us to Washington, D.C. And I said, hey, y'all don't want to do that, take it work. I said, because y'all send me to Washington, I'm going to be over there to them guys throwing rocks and firebombs. So they decided that would be a bad move for me. And then, see, I was real non-conformist. I mean, I had in '68. I had an afro out here. I had my beard was bigger than it is now, and you know it did like. The guy told me that they weren't gonna let me clear post at Fort Bragg until I shaved and got a haircut. And I went to the base commander, and the base commander said, "Yeah, I can see it now." Well, in civilian life, well, Mr. Thomas, you can't go on vacation because your hair's too long. You know, he said, "Get off my post." You know, he signed and said, "Get off my post." I left Vietnam in June of '68, and I got this. I was really. Well, I went home for 30 days to Asheville, North Carolina, which was my home there, where my parents were. And then I reported, so for 30 days, June, that would put me up to August. So in August, I reported into Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I was just waiting out my time to be discharged. So they didn't assign me to any permanent unit. I was just more or less in a holding company, waiting for time to be discharged. And then, like I said, every now and then you have these guys that want to exert their authority, and we gonna make you work for this, you know, and all that. Because, you know, me being who I am, no, you ain't. In fact, to coming home from Vietnam, took them 2 weeks to find me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what happened, they carried me down. They carried me back to Cameron Bay, where, like I said, they had a big bay there, so they had a lot of ships coming there. And they carried me down there, and they showed me this damn thing that looked like a rusting oil tank or something. And it was leaning to the side because the water was shallow, and it was leaning to the side. And they had ballast pumps. They had about 2-3 streams of water, looked like it was about that big of a house shooting out where the water got down in the bow. And they said, "And right home." And I can't swim, and I was like, shit. So of course I disappeared. Yeah. And being able to speak Vietnamese, it was easy to insert myself into a village and make my round of bars and whorehouses and hang out with Papa Son and smoke Tuk Kansar, which was weed, you know. And so I waited them out. They finally found me one day. I woke up one morning, and they had 2 MPs there, and my first sergeant, he said, "You going home today?" and they brought me. I said, "Well, I need to go back to the unit and do these law. Everything the army authorized you to have is in that duffel bag, and we're going to put it on the plane with you." And then what's so bad about it that we flew back, because I had contraband, I had weed and stuff like that. And they carried us to an air base in the Philippines. And they had a big old room like an airplane hangar. And all the guys that was coming, this was like a 747, something great big, 200-300 people on. They carried us in this room and they said, "All right, now here's the deal. When you get back to the States, you're going to have to go through customs or whatever. So if you guys got anything that you shouldn't have, whatever, you got 55-gallon barrels all around there, and just throw it in there, and ain't no questions going to be asked." I messed around and threw away a 45 and threw away a bunch of weed, had a little opium, threw that away. So when we got back in, we came into Fort Lewis, Washington. They took us off the plane, put us on an army bus, and carried us into Fort Lewis. No customs or nothing, put us in the bags, and we stayed there until they made connections for us to get flights to wherever our home destinations were.